In this video, we'll explore various structures that we found on a standard anatomical heart model. The structure is listed in the description below as well as organized into chapters. Let's get started. Now, looking at the heart from an anterior or frontal view, note the direction of the apex of the heart and which way it's pointing. Note that it's ever so slightly pointing towards the left, therefore this is the left side. And then opposite to that, we have the right side. From there, most of the great vessels of the heart we can see on the superior aspect, and therefore on the bottom here is the inferior aspect. Now looking at a more lateral or side view, we can note that the bulk of the heart muscle is facing anteriorly or towards the front, whereas we see the great vessels more on the posterior aspect of the heart. Now looking on a posterior view of the heart, we can see the apex of the heart ever so slightly pointing towards the left, and therefore we know which is the right side, as well as the superior and inferior sides. From the anterior view, we can remove the front of the heart, like so, and expose the four chambers of the heart. Since we know our directions, we can tell that there are two chambers on the right, 1 and 2, and two chambers on the left, 1 and 2. The more superior chambers, this one and this one, are our atria for plural, or singular, we have an atrium. So these have thinner walls versus down below are ventricles, which have thicker walls. So we have the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. Now, acting as check valves to ensure blood flows in one direction, we have 4 heart valves. Between each of the connecting left and right chambers, we have atrioventricular valves, or AV valves for short. So, between the right atrium and the right ventricle, we have the right AV valve. Note that it can also be referred to as a tricuspid valve because we have 1, 2, and 3 leaflets to it. Likewise, on the left side, between the left atrium and the left ventricle, here we have the left AV valve, which can also be referred to as the bicuspid valve because we have 1 and 2 leaflets, but it can also be referred to as the mitral valve. So blood gets delivered to the lungs via this vessel right here, the pulmonary trunk, which we'll come back to. This right here is known as the pulmonary semilunar valve because blood is being sent to the pulmonary system, also known as the respiratory system. Likewise, when oxygenated blood leaves the heart and it's going to be distributed throughout the entire body, we're going to leave via this large vessel right here called the aorta. So therefore, over here, we have the aortic semilunar valve. That brings us to the great vessels of the heart. These vessels deliver blood to and from the heart to be pumped, but don't actually supply the heart directly with nutrients. So superiorly, we have our first one right here, the superior vena cava in blue. This transmits deoxygenated blood from the upper part of the body, versus inferiorly right here, we can see a little bit of blue right there, but you can see like there's a hole right there at the bottom coming through there. So inferiorly here we have the inferior vena cava, which also transmits deoxygenated blood, but it gets blood from the lower half of the body primarily. The two mix their blood right here in the right atrium. Now leaving the right side of the heart, we see that it gets pumped through the pulmonary trunk right here to send deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The pulmonary trunk splits into pulmonary arteries, right here and right here, which will be delivered to the lungs. Now, you may be thinking, wait, why is an artery colored blue? And that's because the pulmonary circuit is a bit backwards. But by definition, an artery is a vessel that takes blood away from the heart. In this case, it's colored blue because it's deoxygenated blood. So after the blood travels to the lungs, on both sides, left and right, the now oxygenated blood travels through pulmonary veins. You can see 4 right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4 colored red to denote they are carrying oxygenated blood, but they are veins technically because they are traveling towards the heart. This is an easy mistake that students make on tests. Now, lastly, we have the aorta here on top. It is the largest blood vessel of the body and transmits blood away from the heart to supply the entire body. Now for the general path of blood goes as such. Deoxygenated blood will return to the heart via the superior as well as the inferior vena cava and mix in the right atrium. Blood then passes through the right AV valve, also known as the tricuspid valve, and now we're in the right ventricle here. The heart will pump blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve here into the pulmonary trunk. That will split into our pulmonary arteries, colored in blue. They go to the lungs to get oxygenated. Then it returns via the pulmonary veins, and that empties into, right here, into the left atrium. Blood then flows through the left AV valve, also known as the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. Now blood flows into the left ventricle, where it gets sent through the aortic semilunar valve and leaves the heart via the aorta. With this model, we can make out 3 layers of the heart. The endocardium, endo meaning within, is the innermost layer of tissue, and it lines the internal chambers of the heart, as well as the structures within them. It's comprised of an endothelium and loose connective tissue. So if we were to point within the chamber, name that layer, that would be the endocardium. Next is our myocardium, myo referring to muscle, or M for middle layer. That's the thickest layer and is comprised of involuntary cardiac muscle tissue. It does vary in thickness, with the thickness being here in the ventricles compared to being thinner in the atria. Then we have the epicardium, epi meaning upon, and it's actually a subdivision of the pericardium, which we're not going to see the entirety of the pericardium. Specifically, the epicardium is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. For the sake of this video, it is any part of the external surface of the heart that we point to and we say name this layer of the heart. It's primarily comprised of connective tissues and a mesothelium and contains our coronary blood vessels. Not shown would be the entirety of the pericardium, which can be thought of as a balloon in which would be surrounding the heart. It functions to secrete pericardial fluid to reduce the friction of the pumping heart. We've already established that part of the heart that points inferiorly into the left is the apex, which is part of the left ventricle. Opposite to that is the base here on the top, which is formed mainly from the atria in the vicinity of the great vessels, and is technically more in the posterior aspect of the heart, but the base is up here. Next, we have the auricles, or the ears of the heart. On the right, we have the right auricle, and on the left, we have the left auricle. They're technically appendages of both atria, and they are somewhat shaped like ears, thus their name. They are thin-walled and hollow inside, just like the rest of the atria. Now, our coronary vessels are vessels that directly supply the heart muscle, the myocardium, with oxygen as well as other nutrients. They have several other names depending on their location. This model is relatively limited in its size and details. So in general, a red vessel is going to be considered a coronary artery versus a blue vessel as a coronary vein. Again, note they have various different names, but for the purpose of this video, coronary artery, coronary vein. Note that on the back of the heart, we have the coronary sinus. That's right here. Now that coronary sinus is where the coronary veins are going to drain to. It's going to collect deoxygenated blood and drain into the right atrium, along with blood coming from the superior and inferior vena cava right in here. The anterior longitudinal sulcus down here is a groove on the anterior surface of the heart, and contained within it, there's some relatively good-sized and important vessels. Likewise, on the back of the heart here, we have the posterior longitudinal sulcus, or posterior interventricular sulcus. It's another groove that separates the two ventricles between the left and the right. Removing the front of the heart again. So our chorda tendineae, those are sometimes referred to as the heartstrings. They are these fibrous cords that work to ensure proper closure of our AV valves. They connect both of our AV valves to anchor points known as papillary muscles. So right here, there's a little bump right there. It might be hard to see. Normally this cord, it should be attached to there. The glues come off of this one, but that's our papillary muscle. So together, both the papillary muscles as well as the chorda tendineae, they work to ensure proper closure of the AV valves. If we look at our atria, as well as inside of the auricles, on the inside we can see these grooves right there, these comb-like grooves. These are muscular ridges, and they're named so as pectinate muscles because they resemble a comb or a rake. I like to think about them as being related to pectoral muscles, so meaning they're going to be higher up and they're going to be located inside of the atria, versus a very similar structure that's located inside of the ventricles, which is the trabeculae carnae, which are these ridges right here, these projections upward. They're irregularly shaped columns found inside of the ventricles. Right here, the interventricular septum is quite simply the wall that separates the right and the left ventricles. Our fossa ovalis, or ovale, is this structure right here. It's that oval-like structure, might be kind of hard to see. The fossa ovalis is a remnant of the fetal foramen, which is basically a way so we could bypass the lungs, because in a fetus, the lungs aren't functioning. They're not breathing in oxygen. We're getting that from the mother. Now, this model also doesn't include one of them, but there is also something similar, the ligamentum arteriosum, which you might see in some models, which is essentially a remnant of the ductus arteriosus. So both of those exist to bypass the lungs in the fetus when breathing is not necessary.